some simplification is a must. Because you can't do it like this, taking each structure one by one and trying to analyze it. Then there is no design, there is no prediction, there is nothing. There is only analysis of a crystal structure in terms of interactions. And every crystal structure which you look at, after you get the crystal structure, it looks so nice. All the interactions look beautiful. The question is, can I predict these interactions before, when I am shown only the molecular structure? It seems that I can't from all what I have told you. So a simplification therefore is required. Now this simplification is something that I provided in 1995 with this paper in Angewandte Chemie, which has now become, of course, very well read and well known in the subject, where I proposed this idea of the supramolecular synthon. By analogy with E.J. Corey's original definition of the term synthon, which is a small structural unit which is used in retrosynthetic analysis or a logic-driven plan for synthesis of complex molecules. So a supramolecular synthon is a small arrangement of functional groups. For example, this carboxylic acid dimer which I showed you. Here, for example, there are different types. This is an interaction between a cyano group and a chloro group. This is a hydrogen bonded one. This is a synthon which is seen in the crystal structures of secondary amides, for example. So it is got some small molecular fragments and some intermolecular interactions. So these synthons are sort of repeating patterns. They are kinetically favored states. They are probabilistic things. What I am saying is, if you take a large number of, say, secondary amides, the chances are high that the crystal structures of all of them will contain this. And so I am trying to get an empirical solution of the molecule to crystal problem. Remember, we faced this problem when we went from benzoic acid to acetic acid. Same functional group, different crystal structures. Now I am saying the opposite. I am saying that generally if you have a secondary amide, you will get that synthon. So then it doesn't matter what the other groups are. This is called structural insulation. It means different portions of the molecule are greater or lesser in importance in terms of the effect they have on the crystal structure. Some portions of the molecule are more significant, other portions are less significant. So in cases where there is a great deal of insulation in the molecule, these are good systems for crystal engineering. Because in those cases you can fool around whatever you like with the other groups and you will not change the crystal structure. Otherwise, if the insulation is not good between different portions of the molecule, every time I change some small thing in the molecule, the crystal structure will go on changing in a very variable and imprecise way. So the idea of the synthon is, can I identify the most commonly occurring or the most probable recognition patterns in molecules? So you see, I am in a way following the functional group approach, but I am saying, where are these problems going to be minimal? Or where will interference be minimal? The opposite of insulation is interference. Interference is when I take a functional group A and a functional group B, when it becomes more and more emergent and I am not able to get the result very easily. So when the system becomes more emergent, they are more difficult to handle in crystal engineering. And as time went along, people started to be able to analyze more and more complex systems. Let's go ahead. So we can then make an analogy between molecular structures and crystal structures. So in the molecular chemistry, you take atoms and you use covalent bonds and you make a molecule, and this is called synthesis. And then the synthon is the retrosynthetic unit which allows you to do the logic-driven analysis, an example of which I'll show you. We all know what isomers are and reactions and transition states. When we go to supramolecular chemistry, you start with the molecule, you bind them together with interactions, then you get a crystal, and this is called crystal engineering. Therefore, crystal engineering is a supramolecular equivalent of molecular synthesis. The synthon, however, is the same, synthon and synthon. So this is the core concept in both molecular and supramolecular synthesis. A polymorph is a supramolecular equivalent of an isomer. Crystallization is a reaction, and the crystal nucleus then becomes a transition state. So you see the analogy between molecular and supramolecular chemistry is quite nice. And the reason why this analogy is very good is because in both cases, for molecular synthesis and supramolecular synthesis, the whole thing, they are all kinetically controlled events. The synthon is essentially a kinetically viable unit. Let's take it like that. Now let's move on. The rest of this talk. Now, how I think, when did I start, sir? Did I start half an hour ago? Fine, I'll be able to finish that. Now, the rest of the talk, I'm going to say something very briefly about certain kinds of intermolecular interactions. I'll talk about that second phase of the definition, the design itself, using synthons, how we do it. And then briefly a look to the future. What are some of the current things that are going on? Because crystal engineering is now featuring as a whole 30 lecture course in many universities. So I can't pack the contents of 30 lectures in one lecture, that's clear. So I'll just have to give you an idea. That's why I went a bit slow till now. What have I told you so far? I've told you the essential difficulty of the subject. That is, this molecule to crystal is not easy, because very strange things start happening. It's a complex system and therefore it's emergent and so on. And I have told you the need for a simplification, and I have told you what is the method of simplification using these synthons. Now let's look at the interactions in some more detail. These are the common ones which usually figure in molecular crystals. I don't need to say too much about all these things. They are all very well known, very, very heavily studied. I will not have much time to talk about the halogen bond this morning, but let me tell you that it is one of the most exciting and active areas of research in crystal engineering today. And it's a great many applications of this halogen bonding in many, many places. By halogen bond, essentially I mean a situation where the halogen atom is electrophilic. So that is halogen becoming like halogen delta plus, that kind of thing. So these halogen bonds are now really the forefront. There's a whole international conference on halogen bonds only, which is held once every 2 years. It's finding a wide variety of applications. But today I don't think I'll have time to talk about that. Now hydrogen bonds, of course, they are the most common interactions in crystal engineering, because they are both strong and directional. And as I said, directionality is the key to crystal structure design. Because directionality, if I say that things like to orient in certain ways, you see, I'm again getting back to the synthon idea. So by putting hydrogen bonds together, you can start constructing stable synthons. So it's an attractive interaction. Now this comes, by the way, I must tell you a little bit of this. The original story about hydrogen bonds, of course, is Pauling's definition, which says that it's a relatively strong interaction where the forces between molecules are relatively large. And therefore, he said only the most electronegative of elements, oxygen, nitrogen, fluorine, etc., can form hydrogen bonds. Now, of course, a great deal of work has happened after that. Many of you will be aware of our own contributions in the area of weak hydrogen bonding, especially CHO and so on. Great many groups all over the world also have been looking at CHO very actively, starting from the 1980s. And about 15 years ago, IUPAC set up a small committee to redefine the hydrogen bond, because they felt that the old definition, which came around 1960 based on Pauling's work of the 1930s and 1940s, was really out of date, especially with all the work on weak hydrogen bonding. So you can see this particular committee Uh, we had, it was a 6-member committee. We met for about 2, 3, 4 meetings over 4 or 5 years into. Because every time there were a lot of discussions, debates, and we also extended the discussion to the wider community. And as you can see, I put 3 papers there. The first one in Angevante is an opinion piece that I wrote. The second paper in Pure and Applied Chemistry is authored by the 6 members of the committee, and it almost took 2 years to go through the journal because it had went through several rounds of refereeing, because hydrogen bond definition is a very big thing, and IUPAC is like the official thing, it's not anybody just coming and sitting and defining. So you may be surprised, when usually you write a paper, it will go to 2 referees or 3 referees sometimes. Or if 2 referees, one says yes, one says no, it will go to a 3rd referee who adjudicates. These are all very common things. Sometimes in certain prestigious journals, one of my papers once went to 4 referees and then they started talking things. Now, there are no guesses for guessing the number of referees of that Pure and Applied Chemistry paper, because none of you will guess the answer correct. A total of 23 referees were involved for this paper, because the referees themselves are fighting with each other after some time. Because everybody is very, hydrogen bond is like a sort of a sacred topic, like religious thing. So everybody says, hydrogen bond, this is that, exact wording. Each word in the definition the referees were looking at and they were pounding us all the time. So again, that's why it took 2 years to go through the thing. But finally, after these 23 referees, now we are fairly sure. But you see the essence of the definition. A hydrogen bond is an attractive interaction from a molecule or a molecular fragment XX, now very important word, in which X is more electronegative than H. That's all. Only thing is that X should be more electronegative. It doesn't say how much more electronegative it should be. And therefore it immediately brings in the concept of CHO hydrogen bond, because carbon is more electronegative than hydrogen. So this idea of very electronegative elements, oxygen, nitrogen, that Pauling idea, that's gone. That's gone from this definition. And an atom or a group of atoms is the same, in which there is evidence of bond formation. So this again is a big loophole. It's like that generally business which I said, in which there is evidence of bond formation. What is evidence? What is evidence for Professor Ghosh may not be evidence for me, or vice versa. So this is another thing. This definition of hydrogen bond, the current one, this is accepted by the by. Once the interaction is now weak, I told you right in the beginning, strength, angular dependence, and distance fall off. If you take a strong hydrogen bond, OHO, NHO, they're short, they're linear, and the distance fall off is being highly electrostatic, it goes on for some distance. Now if you take something like CHO, firstly it's weak. So therefore they can be long, short, all sorts of things. They don't have to be short, they can be quite long. And by the way, this may surprise you, they can be longer than the van der Waals separation. Because they're electrostatic, they fall off little slowly. So using van der Waals criterion to cut off and say this is not a hydrogen bond, this is a hydrogen bond, that is wrong. That is one of the things that comes out of this definition. Then the angular separation. Strong hydrogen bonds generally they are linear, like this, etc. A weak hydrogen bonds they can do all sorts of things. Because they are weak, they can be deformed by other forces in the structure. So all the ground rules for strong hydrogen bond start changing. So this evidence, what you mean by coming back to evidence, it's a new set of criteria, and actually more important than the definition itself is a sort of appendix we have given in this paper, where we have written all these evidences different times. And once again we have written this, that it is not necessary that it satisfies all those criteria. In If it satisfies a certain critical number of criteria, it's enough, you can call it a hydrogen. So idea of hydrogen bond itself now has changed. This was only a formality. IUPAC definition is only a formality. Lots of things that were researched and published by then already indicated this particular sort of thing. Now let's move on. That is the paper itself. And this is, I said, just a slide on halogen bond and the electrophilic thing. I'm not going to say anything about this too much. Halogen bond I've written like hydrogen bonds and yet different. They like hydrogen bonds because the same electrophilic thing is there. Hydrogen is the electrophilic thing in the hydrogen bond. Halogen is the electrophile in the halogen. Now, similarity of halogen bonds and hydrogen bonds you can see. For example, this is hydroquinone. So you can see the OH, 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 infinite, 1,4-dichlorobenzene. This is the chloro halogen bond. This is hydroquinone, where you have OH, 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 same thing, same topology. And this is 1,4-diethynyl benzene, where you have CH pi, CH pi, CH pi, CH pi, CH pi. So the topology of interactions is the same, whether it is halogen, whether it is OH, whether it is CH. In each case there is an electrophilic atom, hydrogen, hydrogen, halogen. In each case there is a nucleophilic atom, the triple bond, the oxygen atom and the halogen. The halogen, by the way, in a halogen bond is both electrophilic and nucleophilic. It's electrophilic along the polar direction, that is in the direction of the C halogen bond. It is nucleophilic in the perpendicular. So you can see the crystal structure of 1,4-dichlorobenzene. It perfectly suits the idea of electrophile-nucleophile bond, and therefore its similarity to the hydrogen bond becomes all too clear. Now we'll come to this crystal design. So that's all. I'm just giving you a brief flash of these interactions. I mean, many of you know that we have written a book with Dr. Steiner on the weak hydrogen bond. That book is 500 pages. So I'm trying to say something in about 2 minutes. Really, I'm not doing justice to this topic. Now, syntons. Kitaygarodsky talked about close packing, minor deviations. Okay, this is polymorph salts and co-crystals. This was a meeting we had in Delhi about 5-6 years ago, which was from part of an Indo-US collaboration, and it's probably the paper in crystal engineering that has the largest number of authors. There are 36 authors, all Indians and Americans, nobody else. So we talked about the definition once again of polymorph salts, co-crystals. This co-crystal is what I want to highlight a little bit, because it's become a very active topic in crystal engineering today. And this is the first time a co-crystal was discovered. This is Wohler's quinhydrone. And you can see the crazy formulas they have written for quinhydrone in those ancient days. This is from a book, German book, published in 1906, but Wohler's work itself is from 1840. And Kekulé talked about it around 1870 and so on. So quinhydrone has been around for a long time. They knew it's a molecular complex, but they of course, obviously they didn't know what the structure is in those days. Now look, how do you use supramolecular syntons to design co-crystals? Synton design co-crystal. Now look at this. This is a primary amide. This purple thing is one of the important amide syntons. If you co-crystallize a primary amide with a dicarboxylic acid, now you see what happens. You get this blue synton where you have an acid group and an amide group. This is called a heterosynton because there is acid amide as opposed to this homosynton. So generally it is known to crystal engineers that the acid amide synton is more favorable than either acid-acid or amide-amide homosynton. So you can see this is what I call supramolecular homologation. From a one component crystal I have now got a two component crystal. And now I am going against diffusion because crystallization is always supposed to be a purifying technique. You take impure things and crystallize, you get pure stuff. Crystallization is inherently an excluding phenomenon, it's not an including phenomenon. So we're bringing in a second molecule, you have to fight against something. So these interactions have to be pretty good in the co-crystal before the co-crystal forms reproducibly. Now this acid amide synthon that I have given you, the blue one, is a particularly reliable, we call it in the subject robust. It's a particularly robust synthon, so that by taking an acid and an amide together, generally we can be sure that we will get something like this. Now what do we do with this technique? This is, for example, in the organic synthesis language, this is the methodology. How do we actually use this reaction? This is a supramolecular reaction. How are we going to use it?